There's a silent pain you've been carrying since childhood that no one ever validated. Carl Jung discovered something revolutionary. That emotional loneliness you felt as a child didn't disappear. It transformed into the way you think today. And the world calls it narcissism, but Jung knew it was something far deeper and more human. You learned to protect yourself when no one was there. You built a psychological armor so effective that now it seems like part of who you are. That child who cried alone in their room is still commanding your reactions, your relationships, your choices, and you don't even realize it. It's not your fault. It's survival. Jung understood that behind every behavior others judge as narcissistic, there's a child who needed to be seen and was ignored, a child who created brilliant mental strategies to endure the unendurable. Except those same strategies that saved you in childhood might now be imprisoning you. What you're about to discover here isn't another text blaming or labeling you. It's the naked truth about how your mind works and why. Jung believed the psyche never forgets. Every moment you needed comfort and found emptiness instead got stored somewhere deep. Not as memory exactly, but as a blueprint for how the world works. You learned early that needing someone meant getting hurt, so you stopped needing. Or at least you thought you did. The truth is more complicated. That wound didn't close. It just went underground. Now it shows up in ways you don't connect to childhood. When someone gets too close, you feel suffocated. When they pull away, you feel abandoned. Both reactions come from the same place. That little kid who sat alone wondering why nobody came. Your mind created something Jung called a complex. Think of it as a knot of emotional energy that has its own agenda. This complex doesn't care about your adult logic or your good intentions. It activates when something in the present echoes that original loneliness. Suddenly, you're not a grown person anymore. You're that child again, and the child is terrified. What makes this so cruel is that you can't see it happening. The complex operates below conscious awareness. You just feel the surge of emotion and react. Maybe you lash out. Maybe you withdraw completely. Maybe you do something to prove you don't need anyone, even though part of you is screaming for connection. This is where narcissistic patterns take root. Not from evil or selfishness, but from a nervous system that learned danger lives in depending on others. Your brain is trying to protect you using information from 20 or 30 years ago. It doesn't know the threat has passed because emotionally it never did pass. You never got the resolution a child needs. No one came back and said it wasn't your fault, that you deserved to be held, that your feelings mattered. So the wound stays fresh under all the years and accomplishments and relationships, and it runs the show more than you realize. Every defensive reaction, every moment you push someone away before they can leave you, every time you feel that familiar emptiness even when surrounded by people, these aren't random. They're breadcrumbs leading back to that original moment when you needed someone and faced silence instead. The cruel irony is that you're still that child in many ways, still waiting for someone to see you, still protecting yourself from a pain that already happened. Your adult self builds walls and calls it strength. Your child self huddles behind those walls and calls it safety. Neither of you realizes you're both prisoners of the same moment that never ended. Trust got broken before you had words for what trust meant. Someone was supposed to be there and they weren't. Maybe physically present but emotionally vacant. Children don't rationalize this. They just feel the terror of being unseen in a world too big to navigate alone. Jung understood that we build our reality from these early experiences. If the people who were supposed to care couldn't be counted on, then a very simple equation forms in your developing brain. People equal pain. Connection equals danger. The safer choice is always to stay separate. This isn't a conscious decision. It's survival logic from a time when you had no other options. Now you're an adult, and that same logic is still running. You might have relationships, even long ones, but there's always a part of you that stays back. A part that never fully relaxes. You catch yourself testing people, waiting for them to prove your childhood fears correct. And often they do, not because everyone is untrustworthy, but because you're unconsciously selecting people who confirm what you already believe. This creates a brutal cycle. You want closeness, but you can't allow it. The moment someone tries to really know you, that old panic rises. You feel exposed, vulnerable, like that child again with no defenses. So you do something to create distance. You pick a fight. You find a flaw. You disappear for a while. Anything to get back to the familiar feeling of being alone, where at least you know the rules. Other people call this commitment issues or fear of intimacy. Jung would say your psyche is protecting an injury that never healed. The child part of you is certain that opening up leads to abandonment, and no amount of adult reasoning can convince that child otherwise because the child doesn't speak the language of logic. It only knows what it felt. You're not broken. You're stuck in an old pattern that once saved your life. But here's what nobody tells you. The pattern is costing you everything now. Every real connection you could have, every moment of genuine intimacy, every chance to be loved for who you actually are, instead of the fortress you've become. You trade those possibilities for the cold comfort of predictability. Better to be alone by choice than abandoned by circumstance. Better to control the distance than risk the pain. Except you're in pain anyway. Just a different kind. The kind that comes from watching life happen at arm's length. The kind that whispers you're missing something essential, but you're too afraid to reach for it. Trust feels impossible because the last time you trusted with your whole heart, you were too small to survive the betrayal. Now you're big enough to survive it. But you'll never find out because you won't take the risk. Something strange happens when a child can't be themselves and feel safe. They split. Jung called this the development of the persona, the face we show the world. For most people, this is healthy. But when you grew up emotionally alone, your persona became something else entirely. It became a fortress. You figured out early which version of you got the least rejection. Maybe the quiet one. Maybe the perfect one. Maybe the funny one who never shows pain. That version became your identity. You wore it so long you forgot it was a mask at all. Now it feels like who you are. Except it's not. It's who you had to become to survive. The real you is still in there, buried under years of performance. That's the part that feels exhausted for no reason. That's the part that looks at your own life and feels like a stranger. You achieved things, maybe many things, but none of them touched that core emptiness because they were accomplished by the mask, not by you. Jung believed the psyche always pushes toward wholeness. That means the buried parts don't stay quiet forever. They leak out in strange ways. Depression that makes no logical sense. Rage over small things. A feeling that nothing you do matters. These aren't symptoms of failure. They're messages from the parts of you that never got to exist. Here's what most people don't understand about narcissistic patterns. It's not that you think you're better than everyone. It's that you can't let anyone see that you feel like nothing at all. The grandiosity, the need for admiration, the inability to handle criticism are all desperate attempts to keep the mask from slipping. Because if it does, you'll be that helpless child again, and you're certain you won't survive it a second time. The mask isn't serving you anymore, but taking it off feels like death. You've spent decades building this version of yourself. You've gotten good at it. People believe it. Some even admire it. The thought of showing up as you actually are, raw and uncertain and needing things, triggers a panic so deep you can't even name it. So you keep performing. You keep pretending. You keep that wall up between who you show and who you are. The energy this takes is immense. By the end of most days, you're hollow. Not from the work you did or the people you saw, but from the constant effort of being someone you're not. And the worst part? You've done it so well that you've lost track of who you were supposed to be. The mask has merged with your face. You can't find the seam anymore. This is the loneliest prison of all. Being surrounded by people who know your name but not your heart. Being praised for accomplishments that mean nothing to your soul. Living a life that looks good on paper but feels empty in your chest. You learned something most people never have to learn. Feeling what others feel can destroy you. When you were small and vulnerable, you absorbed the emotions of everyone around you. Their anger, their sadness, their indifference. You had no filter, no way to tell where you ended and they began. It was overwhelming, unbearable. So your psyche did something brilliant and terrible. It shut down that sensitivity. Not completely, but enough to function. Enough to stop drowning in feelings that weren't even yours. Jung would say you developed a thick boundary, a wall between yourself and the emotional world of others. This kept you alive. It also cut you off from something essential. Now, empathy doesn't feel natural anymore. It feels like a weakness you can't afford. When someone cries, you might feel irritated instead of moved. When they share pain, you want them to stop talking. Not because you're cruel, but because on some deep level, you remember what it cost you to feel too much. Your system is protecting you from going back to that place of total overwhelm. This is where things get complicated. You might understand logically that someone is hurting, but you can't access the emotional resonance. There's a gap between knowing and feeling. Other people sense this gap. They say you're cold or distant. They accuse you not caring. But that's not accurate. You do care. You just can't let yourself feel it fully because your nervous system still believes that level of openness is dangerous. Jung talked about the shadow, the parts of ourselves we reject. For you, empathy lives in the shadow. It got associated with being powerless, being hurt, being that child who felt everything and had no one to help process it. So you locked it away. You became the person who doesn't need emotional connection, who operates on logic and control. But humans aren't built to live without empathy forever. The cost shows up in relationships that feel hollow, in a persistent sense that something is missing, in moments where you watch yourself react in ways you don't like but can't seem to change. You see someone struggling and part of you wants to reach out, but a bigger part freezes. The freeze isn't indifference, it's terror dressed up as control. What you don't realize is that you're not actually protecting yourself anymore. You're protecting that child who needed protection decades ago. The threat isn't current. The danger has passed. But your nervous system never got the memo. It's still running the same program. Feel too much and you'll drown, so feel nothing instead. Stay hard and you'll stay safe. Except you're not safe, you're just alone. There's a difference between boundaries that protect and walls that imprison. You built walls so high you can't see over them anymore. You tell yourself it's strength, independence, that you don't need what other people need. But late at night when the mask comes off and you're just you in the dark, you know the truth. You're starving for connection, but you've forgotten how to digest it. There's a rage in you that doesn't match the present moment. Someone does something minor and you explode. Or maybe you don't explode outward. Maybe it turns inward into depression or self-hatred. Either way, the intensity doesn't fit the trigger. People tell you to calm down, to get over it, that you're overreacting. They don't understand they're not dealing with an adult response. They're dealing with decades of accumulated pain. Jung knew that unexpressed emotion doesn't disappear. It compounds. Every time you needed someone and they weren't there, anger got generated. But children can't express rage at their caregivers safely. So you swallowed it. You pushed it down. You told yourself it wasn't a big deal. That anger is still there. All of it. Waiting. This is what therapists sometimes miss about narcissistic patterns. The anger isn't about entitlement or ego. It's about injustice that never got addressed. You were a child who needed basic emotional care and you didn't get it. That's legitimately enraging. The problem is your psyche doesn't know how to separate past rage from present frustration. So everything becomes a fight for survival. When someone criticizes you now, it's not just criticism. It's every time you were made to feel worthless. When someone doesn't respond to your text, it's not just a delayed message. It's every time you were ignored. Your reactions seem disproportionate because they're not just about now. They're about then. About a wound that keeps getting reopened. The worst part is this anger often gets directed at people who care about you. They trigger the old pain without meaning to, and suddenly you're attacking them for crimes they didn't commit. Then you feel guilty. Then you hate yourself. Then the cycle starts again. Jung would say your inner child is striking out at anyone who comes close enough to hurt them again. The child can't tell the difference between someone who abandoned you then and someone who loves you now. You carry this anger like a live wire under your skin. Most of the time you keep it contained. You function. You smile. You go through the motions. But it's always there, humming just below the surface. And when it breaks through, it shocks even you with its force. You don't understand where all that fury comes from. You think maybe you're just a bad person. Maybe you're broken beyond repair. Maybe everyone who said you were too much or too difficult was right. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is that you never got to be angry when it mattered. You never got to scream at the people who hurt you when you were too small to fight back. So your psyche holds on to that anger, waiting for a safe target. Unfortunately, the safest targets are often the people trying to love you now. They get hit with rage that has nothing to do with them and everything to do with ghosts they can't see. Understanding this doesn't make the anger disappear, but it's a start. Because once you see where it really comes from, you can stop letting it control every relationship you have. You can start directing it where it belongs. At the past, at the situation, at the loneliness itself. Not at the people standing in front of you trying their best. Jung believed the psyche could heal itself if given the right conditions. Not by forgetting the past or pretending it didn't matter, but by integrating it. By bringing consciousness to patterns that have been running automatically since childhood. This is harder than it sounds. Your entire identity is built on these patterns. Letting them go feels like dying, but staying where you are has its own death. The death of connection, the death of being truly known. The death of that part of you that still hopes things could be different. You've survived this long by staying protected, but survival isn't the same as living. Somewhere inside you know this. That's why you're still here, still reading, still searching for a way out of the maze you've been trapped in since you were too young to understand what was happening. The first step isn't fixing yourself. It's understanding that you're not broken. You're adapted. Everything you do that others call narcissistic made perfect sense at one point. It kept you safe when nothing else could. The problem is you're still running software designed for a threatening environment that no longer exists. You're defending against dangers that aren't actually present anymore. This means you can learn new patterns, not by forcing yourself to be different, but by slowly showing your nervous system that connection doesn't always equal pain. That being vulnerable doesn't always lead to abandonment. This takes time. It takes patience. It probably takes help from someone who understands trauma because you can't think your way out of this. The wound isn't in your thoughts. It's deeper. Jung talked about individuation, becoming who you actually are beneath all the defenses. For you, this means meeting that child who was left alone, not abandoning them again by calling them weak or broken, but finally giving them what they needed all along. Validation, compassion, the message that they deserved better and it wasn't their fault. You don't have to stay trapped in patterns from 30 years ago. The prison is real, but the door has always been unlocked. You just have to be willing to walk through it, even though everything in you screams that it's not safe. On the other side isn't perfection. It's just the chance to be human, flawed and whole and finally free. This journey isn't about becoming someone new. It's about finding who you were before the loneliness taught you to hide. That person is still there, buried under years of protection and performance and pain, but there, waiting for you to come back, waiting for you to say it's okay now, you can come out, the danger has passed, the work is uncomfortable. You'll have to feel things you've spent a lifetime avoiding. You'll have to sit with that child inside you and hear their pain without running away. You'll have to practice trust in small doses with people who've earned it. You'll stumble. You'll fall back into old patterns. That's normal. Healing isn't linear, it's messy and slow, and sometimes it feels like you're moving backward. But every time you choose connection over isolation, vulnerability over walls, you're rewiring decades of conditioning. You're teaching your nervous system that the world isn't what it used to be, that you're not that helpless child anymore, that you have choices now you didn't have then. This is how freedom begins, not with a grand transformation, but with small acts of courage repeated until they become natural, until the mask slips away and you realize you don't need it anymore, until you look in the mirror and recognize yourself for the first time in years. After years studying Jung's work and observing these patterns in real life, I've come to believe that what we call narcissism in adults who were emotionally abandoned as children is actually arrested development frozen in survival mode. These aren't people who love themselves too much. They're people who never learned how to love themselves at all, because nobody showed them they were worth loving. The tragedy isn't that they built walls. The tragedy is that they built them so well that even they can't find the door anymore. But here's what gives me hope. Every single person carrying these patterns has already proven they're a survivor. They made it through childhood emotionally alone, and that takes incredible strength. The same strength that built the prison is the same strength that can dismantle it. You just have to decide that surviving isn't enough anymore. That you want to live, really live. And that decision, terrifying as it is, changes everything.